Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are talking about recruiting in the age of COVID, recruiting in the age of remote working, recruiting in the age of distributed workforces. And I'm joined by Jessamyn Katz, who is president of Heyman Associates. Known Jessamyn a long time, and she's super talented at acquiring talent for some of the world's largest organizations. And we're happy to have her. Jessamyn, thanks for coming on. Can you give
Yeah,
the audience a quick intro on yourself?
sure. No, thanks for having me. It's good to see you and do this. And as you said, I'm president of Heyman Associates. We're a specialist executive search firm focusing exclusively on the functions of communications, public affairs, corporate marketing. We are industry and geography agnostic, but work closely as a team in both San Francisco and New York to help our clients find the best and most appropriate talent for what they need in those functions.
That's great. And knowing that you do work with some of the largest organizations in recruiting talent for the marketing communications industries, what have you been seeing over the past few months? Like, what trends have just developed rapidly as a result of the pandemic and all the changes that it's forced upon us?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this because unprecedented is such a cliche now in talking about the last 4 months. But we, like everybody else, are sort of in uncharted territory and figuring it out as we go. And there was definitely the first phase of this was a little bit of paralysis on the part of the market and our clients. And I think, as I describe it, all parts of the hiring supply chain were messed up, just like everyone else, from the bandwidth of decision makers to some of the more tactical pieces of background checks and just getting all of the necessary sort of steps done. I think, once we sort of came out of phase one and we're probably in phase 2 or 2.5 now, a couple of sort of observations and trends emerge. I think on the skill side and where we saw clients immediately pivot or kind of focus was in 2 ways that are probably obvious. The biggest being in internal communications and employee engagement. I think it had been I think a transformation for the function over the last many years, that this piece of the function sort of shot up the chain in terms of importance, integration, sort of not living in a one-dimensional under HR land. But I think this really put a magnifying glass on it for a lot of companies. And we even saw, entire external communications teams and resources, move over and become part of the internal communications sort of machination. So I think that sort of skill set and just sort of DNA, there's been sort of a realization that these 2 functions don't live in silos or shouldn't live in silos. So that for one, and the other is definitely sort of crisis. It's sort of no surprise, and is, I think, always kind of a table stakes skill for the function, but certainly rose in importance. And then the other, is just from a process standpoint, we've all had to adjust. I mean, I never thought that we would see a time where our clients would be making hiring decisions at a very senior level, never having met a person in person. And yet that is happening. I mean, we have, closed a number of assignments in the past 4 months where hiring manager and candidate have not met in person. At some point in time, there will be a relocation for the candidate to a market. I mean, maybe they visited in the past, but they didn't do the regular real estate tour that they would do under normal circumstances. So there's the process itself is also very different.
And just speaking of that, I realize this is somewhat super tactical, but assuming like even your, you're obviously placing senior level communications professionals in these organizations, all of whom are very skilled and have great interpersonal skills for the most part. But like getting that across over Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other video sharing platforms is tough. It's difficult. You've got to try to make that human connection. Have you seen folks struggle at that, maybe both on the employee and on the employer side in terms of leveraging or just using these platforms to the fullest extent possible?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for some people, it is not a natural way to connect, build a relationship. And now it's really sort of our only option. So it's kind of forced people to get comfortable. I think the good thing is that on the hiring side and on the candidate side, we're using this platform or a version of it for all things and all kinds of engagement. So this is not the only sort of new way of engaging virtually just for recruiting or finding the right person. So I think that people have sort of found their footing in different ways, but it definitely, I would say, it typically means that there's more time invested on both sides. So where it used to be just one in-person hour-long interview, there may be two separate hour-long Zoom meetings to accomplish what you could have accomplished in one sort of meeting. The good news is some of that happens more quickly because people on both sides, and this is not necessarily a good thing ultimately, but are working a lot more, have nowhere to go. And on the candidate side, people have a little bit more privacy and can have these conversations in the middle of their day a little more easily.
And let's talk about location and proximity, because this is an area I'm really fascinated by in terms of how the pandemic, I believe, will impact recruiting talent, not just during the pandemic, but long after. So you've got everyone remote working now for the past 4 or 5 months. It's largely proved successful, especially in a profession like ours, where we are set up and can do a lot of what we can do from home. Are your clients, do you see companies now fully embracing the notion that they can recruit talent really anywhere in the world? It doesn't have to be in proximity to their corporate headquarters. Or do you think that this is just a temporary trend or phenomenon that will quickly revert back to, you know what, I need you in the office 5 days a week, so you need to relocate and move and be in the headquarters as often as possible. What are your thoughts on that long term?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, and one that we, excuse me, have been talking about a lot internally, just observationally what we're seeing. I would say sort of there hasn't been a categoric flip of the switch. Okay, we're open to this person being based wherever they currently live and they never need to relocate. I think at a senior level, there is still a hope and expectation that when it's safe, we will return to the office and this senior person will be one of those folks. Now, I think as we see the timelines sort of get pushed out, as onboarding happens virtually anyway, and it's always those first 6 to 8 months that are most critical to be physically proximal to someone. And if that doesn't happen anyway, will we see then in another 6 months, a year, a little bit more sort of openness to this sort of remote model at a senior level? I think probably, but I think it's sort of too early. I think for sure at the mid-level and even junior levels, I think you're going to see a lot more flexibility. I think what is too soon to say is how sort of leadership cultures and company cultures will shift. And then whether hiring and being more open in terms of where the person is based. Because, I mean, the reality is if you're going to be open to where this person is sitting, you'll also have more likelihood of finding the perfect person or your ideal candidate if you don't care where they are. But I do think in order for this person to be successful, you have to be where the decisions are made. And if the decisions are made in sort of a decentralized virtual way, then it doesn't matter where this person is. So
Yeah.
I don't know, that was a long-winded, the jury is out.
Well, I think you're right. I don't think, no one knows, right? We'll have to see. I do wholeheartedly agree with your comment around culture, right? This is not a one-off. It's not a perk. It's not something that sits on the side. Certain companies that will embrace remote working as much as they embrace having the individual in the office, it has to come from the core of the culture, and it has to come from leadership too. So I think they have to see the business benefit behind it before they can embed it into the culture and really drive it throughout the organization, whether it's the chief communications officer or, quite frankly, any senior level function, or even middle management function as well.
Yeah. And I've heard from a lot of people who are, working in companies at leadership levels and mid-levels, and this has been a real sort of ground shift for how they've had to work. But I've heard in a number of, especially more traditional sort of organizations, where showing up to the office, 5 days a week, certain hours of the day was the way you were successful, to now a level of excitement in some ways that this accelerates some, cultural working cadence modernization that I think will have benefits when it comes to recruiting, retention, culture as well.
Last question for you, Jessamyn. So given everything going on and all the turmoil and change happening, and I'm mostly focusing on the senior level sort of communications professional right now, is now a good time or a bad time to be changing jobs or to be looking for the next opportunity? What's your opinion on that?
It's a bad time. Stay put. If you've got a good gig, stay put, hunker down. Not to say that the market has come to a screeching halt and there are opportunities. I think there will be more opportunities. And the pent-up demand, particularly this function, I think this function's in a better spot than many, having played such a critical role through the crisis, and will continue to do so on the other side. But right now, it is, it's a hiring manager's market. And so if you are a candidate, the market turned overnight from where we were in February, early March even, to a candidate's market where it was really, the candidate had the leverage, to now, if you're a candidate, you're one of many.
Well, Jessamyn, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you and to connect again, albeit virtually, and I look forward to our next chat.
Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
Anytime.